sunnahs, read them and then join the Jamaat. If you feel that by praying your sunnahs you're going to end up missing the Jamaat, so let's say for example, if you come into the masjid and the Iqamah is being said for Fajr, you know that you have time because the Jamaat is yet to commence. You could easily pray your sunnahs and then join the Jamaat at a later stage. If, however, you've come in for Fajr and the Imam is sat in Tashahud, then you know that you don't have time, because by the time you complete your sunnahs, the Imam will have finished the Jamaat and you will miss the Jamaat. Then the instruction is that you go and read your Fard prayer. And then you don't read the sunnahs afterwards. Why?
You have to wait until sunrise.
Because that time is not recommended for prayer, is not permitted for prayer anyway. So then the sunnahs are left.
So you leave them completely, you don't read them after sunrise?
No. That's in the situation where you're doing qada before zawal time of the whole prayer. But anyway, so that's the section on prohibited times, or times when it is prohibited or disliked for anyone to pray. Occasions or situations where prayer is prohibited. As-salawatul mamnu'ah. Occasions or situations where prayers are forbidden, are prohibited. Number one, as-salatu bighayri wudu, prayer without wudu. Sayyidina Abu Hurairah radiyallahu ta'ala narrates, the prayer of somebody who is not in a state of purity or is in a state of ritual impurity will not be accepted until he is pure, until he has done wudu. Hatta yatawadda, so until he has completed his wudu. So it's like stating the obvious, but yes, it's still something that needs to be stated. It's something that I definitely remember talking to you about very early on towards the beginning of this book, was about how detailed this field or this science of fiqh actually is, right? To the extent that even the most remote possibility or eventuality have been discussed by the fuqaha. Right? In certain situations it's so far-fetched that you might think, is this ever going to happen? But you still know, if it does happen, what you need to do in that situation. So the first one, you don't pray without wudu. And there was somebody who was sitting in that gathering when Sayyidina Abu Hurairah radiyallahu ta'ala, when he narrated this hadith. Somebody was sitting in this gathering and listening. قَالَ رَجُلٌ مِّنْ حَضْرَمَوْتٍ, so he was from Yemen, from Hadramaut. And he was sitting in the gathering of Sayyidina Abu Hurairah radiyallahu ta'ala while he was narrating this hadith. And he asked a question. He said, Mal hadath ya Abu Hurairah. He said, Abu Hurairah, you've used this term hadath, which means ritual impurity. He said, what is it? What does that mean? And Sayyidina Abu Hurairah radiyallahu ta'ala, he explained that hadath is for somebody to break wind. So he gave him an example of what ritual impurity is, or for ritual impurity, how ritual impurity is comes about. Number two, Salatul Junub. So the first one was somebody who's in a state of minor ritual impurity, or hadath. The Arabic term is hadath. Ha, dal and أخفاء حدث. That's minor ritual impurity, which in simpler terms is what? It's a state when you are required to make wudu in order to pray. And janaba is major ritual impurity, or a state in which you are required to do ghusl in order to pray. So salatul junub, a person who is in a state of major ritual impurity should not pray, and that's forbidden. Based on a narration again of Sayyidina Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala. The previous narration of Sayyidina Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala, that was narrated by Imam Bukhari. This one also narrated by Imam Bukhari, also taken from Sayyidina Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala, says that the Iqama had been said and the rows had been straightened. فَخَرَجَ إِلَيْنَا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came upon us at that time when the Iqama had been said, the rows had been straightened. فَلَمَّا قَامَ فِي مُصَلَّاهِ. When he stood in his prayer, place of prayer, so where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would usually lead the prayer, when he stood there, ذَكَرَ أَنَّهُ جُنُبٌ. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam remembered that he was required, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam remembered that he was to do ghusl. فَقَالَ لَنَا. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, مَكَانَكُمْ, stay in your places, stay where you are. He went, ثُمَّ رَجَعَ, he went back. فَاغْتَسَلَ, then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did ghusl. ثُمَّ خَرَجَ إِلَيْنَا, then he came back. وَرَأْسُهُ يَقْطُرُ, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's hair, drops of water were falling out of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's hair as he approached us again. فَكَبَّرَ فَصَلَّيْنَا مَعَهُ. And so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam then said, Allahu Akbar, he said takbir, and we prayed with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So these are all methods of teaching of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, practical demonstrations of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's narrated by Imam Bukhari. Number 3, Salatul Ha'id, the prayer of a woman who is menstruating. Also narrated by Imam Bukhari. And this is regarding Sayyida Aisha Siddiqa radiallahu ta'ala anha, that during the Hajj time, Sayyida Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha once started to menstruate. So she participated in all the other rites of Hajj except for tawaf, because obviously that requires entering the masjid, which is forbidden in that state. So she did everything except tawaf and salah. So all the other rites of Hajj she did except for tawaf and salah. The next section that we move on to is how to complete your fard and obligatory prayer. إدراك الفريضة, completion of the obligatory prayer. اعلم أنه لا يحل الخروج من المسجد بعد النداء. The first thing Imam Sawarji says that you should know that it is not permissible to leave the masjid once the adhan has been called. So if you have come into the masjid, it may not be salah time yet, it may be for some other reason, but while you're there, the adhan for the next obligatory prayer has been called, then it's not permissible, or it's not recommended for you to leave the masjid after the adhan has been called, until the fard prayer has been prayed, right? Or until you have prayed the fard prayer. And this is narrated by Abu Sha'tha, who says that كنا قعودا في المسجد مع أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه. We were sitting in the masjid with Sayyidina Abu Hurairah رضي الله تعالى عنه, and the muazzin gave the azan. فقام رجل من المسجد يمشي. A person got up and started to walk out of the masjid. And so Sayyidina Abu Hurairah رضي الله تعالى عنه, he followed him. Sayyidina Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala, he watched him حتى خرج من المسجد, until he left from the mosque. And Sayyidina Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala, he then said, أما هذا فقد عصى أبا القاسم, said, this person, he has wronged Abu al-Qasim, and that's the kunya of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So basically he said that he's wronged, or he has disobeyed, rather so he said this person has disobeyed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam by getting up and leaving after adhan, before the Jamaat. So he watched him until he left from the masjid, and then said that what he's done is wrong. And generally speaking, you should also remember, Imam Sawarji says, وَأَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ الْأَفْضَلُ فِي عَامَةِ السُّنَنِ وَالنَّوَافِلِ الْمَنْزِلِ, that it is better, it is afdal, superior, generally, to pray sunnah and nafil in your home. And sometimes things, they develop a trend and culture, and today, for example, I think this might cause, especially in certain traditions and cultures, it might cause some problems if the Imam only came in for Jamaat and then left straight after. But Imam Sawarji is saying that, generally speaking, it's actually better to pray Sunnah and Nafil in the home. This is based on a narration which is narrated from Sayyidina Zaid bin Thabit radiyallahu ta'ala. He says, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made a hujra, a small room or place of residence out of date palm fibers and so on. And so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would pray in that hujra, in that enclosure. فتتبع إليه رجال, people followed the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and eventually found where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was praying, and they saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam praying nafil, and so they started to pray as well. One day ثم جاءوا ليلة. One day or one night they came, and the Prophet ﷺ was slightly delayed in coming to the masjid. And the Prophet ﷺ didn't leave his home. So people started to speak and their voices became raised. They started to speak and their voices became louder. فَرَفَعُوا أَصْوَاتَهُمْ. And they started to call the Prophet ﷺ and eventually ended up at the Prophet ﷺ's doorway, in front of his door, calling out to the Prophet ﷺ. So فَخَرَجَ إِلَيْهِمْ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم. The Prophet ﷺ came to them in a state of anger. So the Prophet ﷺ was angry with them. فَقَالَ لَهُمْ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم. The Prophet ﷺ said to them, "What is with you?" I began to think, because of you're regularly doing this and praying your nawafil and etc. alongside me in the masjid, I began to fear that they would be made compulsory upon you. So you're doing this so regularly that I began to fear that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might make it compulsory for you. فَعَلَيْكُمْ بِالصَّلَاةِ فِي بُيُوتِكُمْ. So therefore, it is necessary for you, it is incumbent upon you, or I instruct you to pray your salah in your home. So your salah here means your own personal, nafil, optional salah. فَإِنَّ خَيْرَ صَلَاةِ الْمَرْءِ. Because the best of a person's prayer fi baytihi is in his home. Illa salat al-maktuba, except for the fard prayer, the obligatory prayer. So the Prophet said that except for your obligatory prayer, other prayers are better for you to be prayed in the home. Anybody think of any hikmah or wisdom behind that? Why the Prophet ﷺ may have said that, or why it is that it may be better prayed at home?
It's blessings for the house that you're living in.
Yes, the Prophet ﷺ did say, don't make your homes into graveyards. Remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in them, recite the Quran in them and so on, and namaz and prayer is one way of doing that. Anything else?
Leading by young children. So I was going to say leading by example. You've got family at home is showing you're committed to prayer as well.
Yes. Still not got the one that I was thinking of. They're all relevant and good answers, but more to do with sincerity and riyā. So being ostentatious. This is the biggest tool perhaps that the shaitan has against you, is where he can take away even your good deeds and use them against you. And so if you are confined to your home with no one else watching or limited number of people watching, there's less chance of you developing those feelings within your heart. We'll stop there. That's the end of that particular section. We're moving on to qada and other issues next. So we'll take a break there. Any questions?
When's the best time to pray Qasar prayers? Because I know some of the elders tend to do it as they read their namaz, so that it just says if they finish Tasbih, they'll read their Qasar Fajr. If they do Zohr, they'll do Zohr. Is that incorrect?
Right, the next chapter that we're coming into is qada. So I'm going to wait till we're going to do that in the next lecture, and if your question is unanswered, then we'll come back to it. Anything else?
really